They laughed before the roof was even finished. Not because the wood was bad. Not because the work was sloppy. But because of the shape. 6 sides. 6 clean, angled walls rising out of the snow like something that didn't belong in the valley at all. "Looks like a damn puzzle," one of the men said, standing with his hands on his hips. "Or a mistake," another added. And then the louder voice came, just to make sure everyone heard it. "You can't even build heat in something like that." The laughter followed. It always did when something didn't look familiar. At the center of it all stood Noah Grady, late 20s, broad-shouldered, focused, the kind of man who didn't rush his work and didn't waste his words. His hands were rough from weeks of cutting timber, and his coat was dusted white from the constant fall of early snow. He didn't argue, didn't defend the design. He just climbed back up onto the frame and kept working. Because what they saw wasn't what he was building. Not really. To them, a cabin was simple. For walls, a pitched roof, a door facing away from the worst of the wind. You built thick. You sealed tight. You burned hot. That was how you survived winter. Noah wasn't trying to build thicker. He was trying to build smarter. The idea hadn't come from nowhere. Months earlier, before he ever cut the first log, he'd stood at the edge of the valley during a windstorm. Not just watching, but studying. The way the wind moved. The way it slammed into flat surfaces, stalled, then forced its way through cracks. The way it curled around corners, creating pockets of pressure that pulled heat outward. Most men felt the cold. Noah watched how it worked. Flat walls caught wind. Corners trapped it. And once it slowed down, it found its way inside. That was the problem. Not just the cold itself, but how easily buildings gave it a place to settle. So he changed the shape. 6 sides. Each wall angled just enough that wind wouldn't hit and stop. It would slide. Move. Wrap around instead of crashing into it. Less pressure. Less force. Less heat pulled from inside. That was the first part. The second part was inside. The frame rose quickly once the foundation was set. Each wall connected at precise angles, forming a tight, symmetrical structure. The logs were cut to fit clean, no gaps, no wasted space. But what made the difference wasn't just the outer shape. It was the center. Instead of pushing everything toward one side like a traditional cabin, Noah built around a central point. The stove didn't sit against a wall. It sat in the middle. The heat didn't rise up and disappear toward one direction. It spread outward evenly, touching every wall at nearly the same time. No cold corners. No dead zones. Just circulation. By the time the frame was finished, the shape spoke for itself. Strange. Unfamiliar. And, to most of the valley, unnecessary. "You're making more work for yourself," one man told him. Noah adjusted a beam into place. "Maybe," he said. "You could have built 2 cabins by now." Noah didn't respond. Because speed wasn't the goal. Survival was. The roof took longer. Not because it was difficult, but because it had to be right. 6 sections, meeting at a central peak. Every angle had to match. Every joint had to hold. Snow wouldn't settle evenly on something like this. It would slide, shift, redistribute. That was the point. Where other cabins collected weight, this one would shed it. Where others carried the burden, this one would move it. By the time the final beam locked into place, the valley had already made up its mind. It was a mistake. Something built by a man who thought too much and understood too little. Noah let them think it. Because he'd seen something they hadn't. And he was willing to wait. Winter arrived early. Not violently. Not at first. A steady fall of snow, cold settling in day by day. The valley slowly turning white and still. Fires were lit. Wood was stacked. Life continued. And for a while, nothing seemed different. Noah's cabin stood like the others, just shaped differently. Smoke rose from the chimney. The door opened and closed. It looked normal, at least from the outside. Inside, it felt different immediately. The first fire he lit didn't behave the way fires usually did. It didn't rush upward, leaving the lower parts of the cabin cooler. It spread. The warmth moved outward in all directions, touching each wall evenly. There were no pockets of chill, no places where the heat seemed weaker. It filled the space. Balanced. He noticed it that first night. Then the second. By the third, he was sure. The shape was doing exactly what he intended. Not stronger heat. Better use of it. The first real test came 2 weeks later. The temperature dropped. Not slightly. Sharply. The kind of drop that made breath sting and would crack. The kind that forced men to wake up in the middle of the night to keep fires alive. Across the valley, Chimneys smoked harder. Flames burned higher. Wood disappeared faster. And still, the cold found its way in. Through seams. Through corners. To places no one thought to check. Inside Noah's cabin, something different happened. The fire stayed steady. Not large. Not aggressive. And yet, the warmth didn't fall off. It didn't disappear when the flames settled. It held. Evenly. One evening, a man named Briggs stopped by. He wasn't there to visit. He had been checking fences when the cold deepened faster than expected, and the wind picked up just enough to make the walk back longer than it should have been. He saw the cabin. That strange six-sided thing everyone had been talking about. He hesitated. Then he knocked. The door opened. And just like that, he felt it. Not a blast of heat. Not a sudden rush. But something steadier. Controlled. He stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him. His eyes moved across the space. The fire was in the center. Small. Too small. He frowned. Then he waited. Because something didn't make sense. The warmth wasn't fading. It wasn't uneven. It didn't feel like it was coming from one place. It felt everywhere. How? Briggs asked. Noah glanced at the walls. It doesn't fight the heat, he said. It keeps it moving. Briggs didn't understand. Not fully. But he felt it. And that was enough. He stayed longer than he planned. And when he finally stepped back outside, the cold hit him harder than before. Because now, he knew the difference. The laughter didn't stop that night. But it softened. Because winter was just beginning. And the valley had no idea yet what was coming next. Winter didn't arrive all at once. It settled in. Slow at first. Just enough cold to keep the ground locked and the air sharp. Then it deepened. The kind of cold that didn't pass through. It stayed. Pressed. Built on itself day after day until even the strongest cabins began to feel it. At first, the valley managed. Fires burned longer. Wood was stacked closer to the doors. Men adjusted routines, waking through the night to keep the heat alive. But then the wind changed. It didn't come in gusts anymore. It came steady, relentless. And that's when the difference between buildings began to show. Flat walls took the hit first. The wind slammed into them, pushing hard against every seam. Pressure built along the corners, forcing its way into gaps that had held fine in milder weather. Inside, the warmth didn't just fade, it was pulled out. Faster than the fires could replace it. Cabins that had always been good enough suddenly weren't. Men burned more wood. They fed the fire constantly. And still, the cold crept in. Corners turned bitter. Floors chilled. Air shifted unevenly, warm near the fire, freezing everywhere else. But Noah Grady's cabin didn't react the same way. It didn't take the wind head-on. It redirected it. Outside, the air slid along the angled walls, wrapping around the structure instead of crashing into it. There were no flat surfaces for the wind to grip, no corners to trap pressure. It kept moving. And because it kept moving, it didn't pull heat out with the same force. Inside, the difference was even clearer. The fire burned low, steady, and the warmth didn't gather in one place. It spread evenly, circling the interior, touching every wall the same way. No cold pockets. No weak spots. The cabin didn't fight the cold harder. It gave it less to work with. By the third week of deep winter, people began to notice. Not from stories. From their own homes. Briggs came back first. This time, he didn't wait at the door. He stepped inside like he belonged there, shutting the cold out quickly behind him. His face was worn from lack of sleep. His coat dusted with snow that hadn't fully melted. He stood still for a moment, then looked around again. Same small fire. Same steady air. Same balance. It holds, he said quietly. Noah nodded. Briggs exhaled slowly, like something had finally settled in his mind. That word spread. Not exaggerated. Not debated. Just repeated. It holds. And that was enough. Over the next few days, others came. Not in crowds. One at a time. They stepped inside, stayed longer than they meant to, and left with the same quiet look on their faces. Not confusion. Understanding. Because once you feel stable warmth in a winter like this, you don't forget it. The laughter stopped completely after that. Because the valley had a problem. Wood was running low. Not everywhere. Not yet. But enough that men began counting what they had left instead of what they could spare. And when that happens, everything changes. Parlin came near the end of the fourth week. He had been one of the loudest before. One of the first to mock the shape. Now, he didn't speak at the door. He stepped inside, removed his gloves slowly, and stood there. The fire was low. The air was even. The space felt quiet. Not just silent. Controlled. He looked at Noah. "You're using less," he said. Noah nodded once. Parlin glanced toward the center stove, then around the walls. "No cold spots. No corners," Noah replied. That was all it took. Parlin didn't argue, didn't laugh, didn't question further. Because outside, his own cabin was losing the fight. And inside this one, nothing felt strained. That night, the temperature dropped further than it had all season. The kind of cold that turned breath sharp and made wood crack without warning. Across the valley, fires burned high. Too high. Men stayed awake feeding them, pushing heat harder just to keep it from slipping away. But high heat didn't last. It surged, then fell, then surged again. Inside Noah's cabin, nothing changed. The fire stayed controlled, and the warmth stayed with it. No spikes, no drops, just steady. That was the difference. And that difference carried through the worst night of the winter. By morning, the valley looked worn. Snow had piled deeper. A few weaker structures had taken damage. Some cabins stood intact, but strained, their owners already thinking ahead to what needed fixing. But one thing stood out clearly. Noah's cabin hadn't changed. Not a beam shifted. Not a seam cracked. It had taken everything the winter gave and redirected it. The sky cleared slowly over the next few days. The cold eased, just enough for people to step outside without urgency. And when they did, they looked. Not at the damage. At the design. Men who had built the same way their entire lives began to reconsider. Not out of pride. Out of necessity. They came to Noah. Quietly. They didn't ask for the exact same build. They asked why it worked. Noah showed them. Not with long explanations. With simple ones. Wind needs something to hit, he said. Don't give it that. Heat needs somewhere to go, he added. Make it go everywhere. That was enough. The first changes started before the snow melted. Not full rebuilds. Adjustments. Angled additions. Modified walls. Central stoves instead of corner fires. Small things. But the kind that matter. By the time winter began to loosen its grip, the valley didn't look the same. Not because of what had been lost. Because of what had been learned. And when the next winter came, as it always did, the difference showed immediately. Fires burned lower. Cabins held longer. Wind passed instead of pushing through. One evening, as the first snow of that new season settled over the land, Briggs stood beside Noah outside the six-sided cabin. They watched smoke rise across the valley. Steady. Controlled. It's quieter this year, Briggs said. Noah glanced out across the snow-covered roofs. It's smarter, he replied. Briggs let out a small breath. They laughed at you. Noah didn't look back at the cabin. He kept his eyes on the valley. They needed to, he said. Briggs frowned slightly. Why? Noah's voice stayed calm. So they'd remember. The wind moved through the valley again. But this time, it didn't stay.